ஐடி மினிஸ்டர் ஆனரபிள் மனோ தங்கராஜ் அவர்கள் வந்து இஎஸ்ஜி பத்தி சொன்னாரு. அப்ப சொல்லும்போது ஒரு என்வைரன்மென்ட், சொசைட்டி, சோசியல் கவர்னன்ஸ் இஎஸ்ஜி அப்படின்னா. ஸோ அதுக்கு ஒரு முக்கியமான ஆள் ஒருத்தர பத்தி சொன்னாரு. ஹி டிட்ன்ட் மென்ஷன் த நேம். ஏன்னாக்கா அவர் இப்ப நம்மோடயே இருக்காரு. ஃபியூச்சர்ஸ் இன்க். This was founded in 2019 by Mac Ramachandran, Mahadevan Ramachandran. He has a passion to leave the world a lot better than we inherited it. His work takes us to many places and takes him to places in Tokyo, Japan, Zimbabwe, China, Kenya, Nigeria, India, everywhere. His company, Futures Inc., invests sweat, monetary equity in companies that he creates and believes in. Futures Inc. seeks to create large-scale social environmental impact profitably. They leverage the power of networks, markets, and technology to make this thing happen. And they are interested in making this happen in Tamil Nadu. And our Honorable Minister, Mano Thangaraj, is going to make sure that it will be effected soon. Now, without much ado, let's bring in Mac Ramachandran.
வணக்கம். என் பேர் மகாதேவன். மிஸ்டர் பாலா and Balaswaminathan and FeTNA, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about a topic close to my heart, ESG investing. Just a little bit of introduction about myself. Originally from Chennai, India. தமிழ்நாட்டிலேருந்து கிளம்பி 30 வருஷம் ஆச்சு. I went to the States to get a PhD in economics. And then 1997 graduated. I was heading to Wall Street to do what most economists did back then. Took a small detour, went to Angola in Southern Africa for 21 days. Essentially to use my quantitative skills to figure out who needs food and who doesn't. That turned into 21 years with the United Nations World Food Program. I lived in Southern Africa, Cambodia, North Korea for 2 years, Zimbabwe, Sudan, essentially running programs serving between 2 to 6 million poor people in each country, managing staff and budgets and stuff. I done last 5 years of the 21 years I was in Rome, headquarters as senior management of a $4.5 billion supply chain, helping with food transfers, cash transfers, etc. About 2.5 years ago, for family reasons, my wife is Japanese. We moved to Japan and organically set up a company called Futures Inc. We work at the crossroads of technology and financial markets for large-scale social and environmental impact. Broadly, we work in 2 areas. One is setting up a series of sustainable development goal impact funds for Japanese investors to invest in developing countries in a structured manner. And then the other is a series of financial instruments on the carbon market, carbon offsets, carbon allowances, with the bulk of our current work being around carbon offsets. On ESG itself, as many of you know, it's a very popular topic. In the last 10-15 years, there's been a big trend in this direction. Currently, around 1/3 of global investments have some sort of ESG in it. So to give you a rough idea, about $20 trillion is negative screening ESG, meaning no alcohol, no drugs, no cigarette companies, etc. Another 35 trillion is positive screening, so actually going and looking for companies with high ESG rankings, or ESG engagement, where you get on the board and make sure there are more women on the company, etc. That's about 35 trillion. And then the one that is close to my heart, and also the business that we do at Futures Inc., is the thematic and impact investing. Thematic investing is investing in removing plastic or protecting the oceans or waste to energy conversion, etc. Impact investing has a much more of a clear mandate in terms of not only tracking the financial returns, but also closely tracking and consciously impacting the indicators. So it could be getting access to water and sanitation for poor people in the Philippines. It could be small off-grid solar for people in Kenya. It could be microfinance for small farmers in India. So the impact investing. So of this 60 trillion that I roughly talk about, around 1 trillion is in this impact investing area, but growing at 20-25% per annum. The reason why it's not much bigger is many reasons, but 2 or 3 of the big ones are the ability to have pipelines of investable sizes, right? To give you some idea in the impact investment space, there was a recent research done about $111 billion of impact investment was analyzed in emerging markets, and they said that emerging market debt, the returns was around 9% in dollar terms, and emerging market equity was 16%. So pretty good returns, because as you know, on the flip side, the world is sitting on $10 trillion of negative yield bonds and treasury rates of return that are 1-2% maximum, even in the US. So essentially, there's a lot of money. So why is it not going towards, let's say, impact investing, if impact investing is giving 9 and 16%? So one big reason is pipelines, the ability to put together $100 million program for microfinance in India, or water sanitation in Bangladesh, or off-grid solar in Kenya is not easy. You need deal sizes, structuring, etc. The other side is just execution. As you all very well know, working in many of these countries carries its own risk. And then, of course, there's a talent shortage of impact investors. A lot of very smart investors in the commercial investment space, and it's developing in the impact investment space. So these are some of the constraints, but obviously a very exciting area, which is why we're in it. We love it. One of the few best things in the world in terms of having your cake and eating it too. Essentially, for us, I think the field is going to grow, as I said, 20-25% per annum, if not faster. So we want to see to what extent we can do things, accelerate the growth. And number two, make sure the growth is indeed pro-poor and true impact and not greenwashing, etc., right? The Sustainable Development Goals that many of you know, the investable part of it is around $2.5 trillion a year. And if you do that correctly, it generates about $12.5 trillion of market value according to the World Business and Social Council. So essentially a huge opportunity. If you take only forests alone, it could be a $400 billion investment opportunity. Renewable energy could be $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion a year investment opportunity. So the theoretical size of the impact opportunity is very, very big. To go from there to the practical is where a lot of our current work, but also many very smart people. For example, there's a famous Silicon Valley impact fund called TPG Rise that started at $2 billion and now is almost reaching $5-6 billion. BlackRock started one right now. So it's getting more and more mainstream in terms of, we ourselves are now planning to put together a few $100 million of forest carbon projects, right? Trying to set up an ETF that could have $1 billion under AUM. So there's different ways of structuring and larger deal sizes, execution, etc. But on a more important note for us, and also sort of the message I want to convey, is that the world has made amazing progress in the last 50 to 100 years, right? If you look at poverty reduction, health, education, maternal mortality, etc., etc. There are two big things that threaten the amazing progress the world has made in the last 50 years. Climate change and inequality. All of you know about climate change. It's going to get bigger, it's going to get worse. But on the flip side, it's an investable opportunity. So how do you get into it? How do you take advantage of it? We have our own niches in it. So that's one. The other is, of course, inequality, right? As you know, India or China or US, inequality is increasing. Usually higher and higher rates of inequality lead to social disharmony and riots and etc. So how do you address that, right? And again, in both impact investing, thematic investing can play a very, very large role in solving these problems, right? To a large extent. I mean, there's also a lot of more personal things like behavioral change and government policy, etc., that have an equally big weight. But given that this topic is on ESG investing, I think we have a moral right to address it, but also a financial reason to address it, because all the financial gains we've made may also be erased by these two in the next 20-30 years. So I think it's really worth for all of us to put our heads together to see how we can accelerate this trend towards ESG investing, and from my own feeling of how do you do impact investing within that, and how do you make it bigger. If you take, for example, Tamil Nadu, they have this Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Fund. I think it's about $500 million. They have a shelter fund there, which does working women's hostel, low-income housing, etc. Right? And they have good market returns. They have investors like JICA and World Bank taking the risky part, private investors coming on top. So there are relatively good size examples. I think there was even an Indian study on the impact investing market in India, looking at about 25, 30 funds, and they said that the gross IRR is 11.9%. So as I said, one of the few areas where you can have your cake and eat it too. So essentially, yeah, would be great to hear feedback from all of you through Mr. Balaswaminathan. And once again, Mika Nandri, FeTNA, for this opportunity. All the very best to everybody.